forming musical linguistic objects.
Greetings from Cyberdelic Space. This is Lorenzo, and I'm your host here in the Psychedelic Salon. And with me today as virtual hosts are a host of fellow saloners who have either made a direct donation to the salon or who have paid for a copy of the audiobook version of my novel, The Genesis Generation, proceeds of which also go to paying the expenses associated with these podcasts. And these wonderful people are Joseph W., Stuart T., Adrian D., Fox over at ultrafield.tv, Daniel D., and Andrew W. So Joseph, Stuart, Adrian, Fox, Daniel, and Andrew, I really wish that there was more I could say besides thank you, but I hope that you and all of the other supporters of the salon over the years know how much I appreciate you. And that also goes for everyone who joins us here each week. We're all in this together, you know. Also, I want to give a plug to fellow saloner Joe Matheny's podcast, which is called The G-Spot, and in particular to his most recent podcast, which features an interview with me. So if you're wanting to know a little more about my background, you might want to check out Joe's podcast, and I'll put a link to it along with the program notes for this podcast, which, as you know, you can get to via psychedelicsalon.us. So now, just 3 days after my last podcast, we're going to pick up where we left off, and that is with the interrogators, I think I should call them, asking Dr. Leary about his sanity, as if dropping a little acid may have done him some harm. And as ridiculous as that sounds today, back in 1976 in Houston when these questions were being asked, well, it was the height of the U.S. government's disinformation campaign about LSD. But as you're about to hear, Timothy Leary didn't let those in-your-face questions about his sanity bother him in the least.
How can you defend your sanity anywhere, anyhow, particularly in a rather insane world? It's the old parable that in a very insane society, a sane person is considered eccentric, and seeing too much can make you look or act different. But no, I'm very happy with my sanity.
I was wondering if, as far as I know, you've not had any neurological examinations or anything like that when you were in prison. I think I have read it published that you did have some extensive psychological testing at one point that involved the Leary battery that had some IQ testing. I think that the issue of being brain damaged is that information correct that you have had testing? And if
yes,
so,
when I was first brought into the California prison system in 1970, they gave me the standard battery of tests, including some tests that I designed myself. I wrote about this in the book Confessions of the Hope Fiend. After all, looked at it pragmatically, the trick of taking intelligence tests is to get the highest score possible in terms of the intelligence that's defined by the middle-class intellectuals who designed the test, so that my IQ test came out very high. Then, during my escape trial in, I believe it was April 1973, this is after I was kidnapped and brought back, because so much rumor is going on about my mental capacity, I called in a battery of neurologists and psychologists, including some employed by the state of California, and one man who worked for Santa Cruz County, and I had them give me a intelligence test, and I came out at the genius level. But that's, again, after all, I understand psychological tests, so that I was more going through a performance than proving anything to myself.
Do you feel that performance made any difference as far as your image to people, that it did anything to dispel those negative images that were created about you?
No, I don't think so. Anyone, you you have to be very realistic about this. In a perfect democracy, every election would end in a tie. That is, the issues would be so presented that 50% would be pro, 50% would be con. My point is that any time you enter the public arena and start broadcasting signals, the best you can expect for is a 50-50 break, that half are going to like it and half won't. In the case of ideas that are so futuristic and so powerful as the ones that I've been transmitting, you're lucky if you get 15 or 20% of the people that will listen to you. The advantage is that it's going to be the most courageous and intelligent and open-minded 15 or 20%, so you got a lot going for you. But it's the nature of the game that a philosopher who's proposing radical new ideas will be opposed by 80% of society. Look at Semmelweis, the great the physician who discovered infectious diseases. He ended up totally ostracized and busted. Look at Pasteur, who was laughed at. Look at Galileo. Not that I'm comparing myself with these people, but I'm simply defining the nature of the game. I'm not at all interested in image. People talk to me about my image, and I laugh at them. I'm interested in communicating with the 10% of the human race who's ready to migrate, ready to mutate, ready to move on, ready to change. And it's a hopeless proposition. You see, if you try to please everybody, you get into a Carter-Ford election, that you're so bland and you're so custard-like in your statements that you're not saying anything. I expect and welcome 80% skepticism to my ideas, because the ideas that I'm transmitting are extremely challenging to our conceptions of human nature. And it's to be expected and welcome that the mass of society will not accept them readily.
You know, one of the images, and I guess it's concerned me as a psychologist and getting into a field that you have been in, is that the charges that you were professionally irresponsible in advocating these futuristic ideas rather than staying within the more traditional domain of the field. And I wonder, what do you think about, what have you been responsible to? Been responsible to the limitations that the field has lived within. What have you been responsible to?
Well, from an early age, I've been interested in only one thing, and that is what is it all about? Why am I here? Why is the human species here? Where are we going? What's the directional cause of our problems, and how can we get our compass bearings so that we can move smoothly with the evolutionary currents? So my responsibility now is to the DNA code. My thinking is obsessed with evolutionary notions. I see myself and our species as robot participants in evolutionary processes. Now, the interesting thing about our robothood, and we're all robots, we're 99% robots. We're stamped out by DNA code the way Chryslers and Pontiacs and Fords are stamped out from the great factories and mass assembly lines. I said 99%, and it's the 1% of us, of our nervous system, 1% possibility that we can decipher the instructions that came on the package. That we are the robots who can open up the panels and look within and find out how our brains work and how our brains intersect with the RNA and DNA. We are the robots who can figure out the nature of our own robothood and start asking the post-robot questions of what does she want? Well, what's the purpose? Why are we here? So my responsibility, to repeat, is to the genetic process and the evolutionary process as I see it. Now, this is an extremely fun position to take. It makes you very good-natured about human nature. I don't get involved in us and thems. I see us all playing parts in the evolutionary process. It leads to a very gentle and embracing notion of human nature. and it does encourage change. My responsibility is to change myself, to keep myself open. People say to me, well, how come you change so much? You're not leading a light brigade charge back to Woodstock, and you're not saying what you said in the 60s. I say, well, come on, why haven't you changed? Everything's changed since the 60s. The lessons have been learned. The great discoveries from the 60s are now part and parcel of the American consumer mentality. There are new change issues involved now, and I try to keep in touch with them.
I guess maybe that could kind of focus us back more concretely on your being here tonight and what you're doing in Houston and how you're actually spending your time now as an evolutionary agent and as this vision that you have of our future.
Evolution is moving very quickly these days, and the script writers are shoving new scripts on us at a very rapid rate, and I take it for granted that I change from season to season.
Well, maybe you can tell us about what scripts you see right now as the current ones.
Well, there's only one script, as I said before, and that's change. That's the message of DNA. Specifically, there are 4 very practical, concrete techniques that the DNA code uses to help evolution. And interestingly enough, these are all M's to make it easy to remember. There's mutation. Mutation is the way that a species changes. Then there's metamorphosis, or molting. That's how an individual changes. And each one of us has gone through at least 4 molts or metamorphoses in our life. We were little babies with big heads and small bodies, and then we learned how to crawl, then we learned how to talk and walk, then we learned to be domesticated sexual impersonators, which defines the civilized domesticated ape. Some of us have moved to more complex energy mutations or metamorphoses. A third element of change, a third technique of DNA code, and this is the classic one, is migration. We all are a result of migrations. We started off under the water, and then we moved on to the shoreline, and we moved on to the prairie. We developed forepaws, and we stood up on our 2 hind feet. We're moving faster, we're moving farther. That's the history of the evolution of life on this planet. So migration is the third form of change. And the fourth, and that's why I'm in this room, I think why all of us are in this room, the fourth technique of the DNA code is media, or marketing. It doesn't do any good to have a good idea unless somehow you can hook it up to energy and send it out. And then again, the good idea is no good unless it's received by those who are ready to receive it and bring about changes. So that I'm very involved in media these days, because I think I do have some new ideas that our species needs, particularly younger people are looking for new ideas, I think. And these ideas, to answer your question finally, Henry, have to do with migration and mutation, metamorphosis. That is, 3 ideas which I think are currently hot. Not hot in a marketplace fad sense, but evolutionarily hot. The 3 ideas that the DNA code is now popping on us are space migration. We're realizing that we're not terrestrials, that some of us are supposed to leave the planet and to start moving around in post-terrestrial spaces. And the second new idea is intelligence increase. We can be exactly as smart as we want to be. Our intelligence is limited exactly by our own laziness and our own apprehensions that if you get too smart, you're in trouble. Because I'm here to tell you, if you get too smart, you're in trouble. And the third new idea, which I think is inevitable and for which we are ready, is life extension. Scientists tell us that we could double the lifespan within 3 or 4 years. These 3 ideas go together. We've used the acronym SMILE, S-M-I-2-L-E, Space Migration, Intelligence, Increase, and Life Extension, to nail down this this basic point that these three things go together, and one without the other two would lead to farce or nightmare.
Well, since you've already, when you discussed the second of the M's, metamorphosis, outlined the first 4 sections of the periodic table of energy, which is a rough chart for the indications thus far that you've found as to the directions that intelligence increase goes. Would you care to outline that portion of it first? Rough methodology of the intelligence increase?
Talking about the first 4 circuits of the nervous system?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, refer to it.
Everyone who's listening to this program, who is adolescents or post-adolescent, has gone through 4 metamorphoses or 4 molts in your lifetime. As I say, you were a tiny baby once, almost a marine creature. You couldn't walk, you had to be supported and carried. And at that time, you had one circuit of your brain which was interested only in biological survival, food, warmth. Then you migrated and mutated a second time when you left your mother's arms. That was a big migration. Wow, compared to the migration from Europe to America, leaving your mother's arms was a tremendous feat. And each one of these mutation migrations that we go through individually, it's a very stormy period in the individual's life, and I think that any one of our listeners who could look back would remember these periods of transition, because it literally is a death, or you're giving up the security of your mother's arms to crawl around down there on the floor. It's very dangerous, where people like to step on you, and all these huge monsters that are playing these games of power and status and territory, what's mine, what's yours, and you're too weak to defend yourself. So these periods of migration and these periods of metamorphosis are always fraught with emotion and anxiety, and that, of course, what's happening today in America. We have to be very gentle with each other because we are going through a period of mutation. Okay, so the second circuit of your nervous system is the emotional aspect, where you're learning to deal with power, status, pecking order, and then you develop all these techniques of camouflage or pretense weakness, or all the mammalian reactions that we call emotions, and which our Shakespearean dramatists tend to glorify far beyond their primitive state. Anyway, the third mutation takes place when the left hemisphere of your brain kicks into operation, and you learn how to use the 9 muscles of your vocal cord, and you learn to use your thumb and your hand to manipulate symbols. This mutation, which each one of us went through, is again accompanied by a migration, because we migrated from the local, from your home, and you moved down to the kindergarten and to the primary school, and as your symbol facilities developed, you moved up to grammar school and the high school. Then the fourth great mutation, and certainly no one can deny that a tremendous transformation took place in our physiology and our neurology when adolescence develops, and all those protuberances and hair growth suddenly began popping out, and light bulbs went off in our heads as the 4th circuit of our nervous system told us that there was a new game to be played, which has to do with sperm egg arrangements and mating and grooming and essentially the selection of a sex role. We're all sex impersonators. We learn during adolescence to pick up one of many sex roles, and we try them out, and we finally settle on one. And when we've done that, we become a domesticated member of the herd or the anthill, and we've completed the terrestrial cycle of life. Well, we call these the first 4 circuits. These are the first 4 terrestrial survival techniques, and you have to master these before you can go on.
Well, obviously, these are common circuitry. They're common experience, and obviously the state of consciousness on the planet today is aware of the fact that those 4 circuits are not adequate to the needs that an increasing amount of human beings are discovering. The turbulence in the 60s being that showing definite major social signs of the chafing. Do the next four, there are four more circuits, and how do they resolve the bind that we've obviously gotten ourselves into? I mean, this bind has led most of the Third Circuit masters of the world to predict imminent doom, imminently. Mm-hmm. And what is the alternative?
Well, before I outline there are four stages of evolution which are going to come within the lifetimes of most of the listeners of this program. But before I go into the next four stages of evolution, I'd like to remind our listeners that the four mutations that we've gone through, the four migrations that we've gone through as individuals, which took us from our mother's arms to the point of socio-sexual domestication, have recapitulated the four great movements in the evolution of species. We all started off as marine creatures. We were all amoebas once under the water, and then we've gone through the same cycle of mutation and migration. And I'm sure that all these cycles in history have produced the turmoil that we saw in the 60s. I'm sure that when several 100 million years ago, perhaps over 1 billion years ago, in some of these tidal pools, there was a youth rebellion and a drug rebellion when some of the amoebas began hanging out in places and overdosing on dangerous drugs like calcium. Now, when that happened, the establishment of amoebas got together and said, well, you know what? It's proven scientifically that if you overdose on calcium, you mutate. It breaks your chromosomes and you develop bones. And if God had wanted amoeba to have bones, he wouldn't have made calcium illegal. This process of evolution has always involved mutations which shake up the species at the moment and lead to a migration. I'm sure when we climbed out on the shoreline, again there was a great upset among the marine creatures that some of the young fish were lying around on shorelines digging the radiation and not playing fish games and overdosing on dangerous drugs like oxygen, and which of course, if you fool around with drugs like oxygen, you know what happens? You develop lungs. And we don't want any self-respecting fish with lungs.
Well, what'll happen when the gills are gone?
Yeah, right.
The mystery will be
yeah,
gone.
Right. So, the interesting thing is that, I keep repeating this to people because I think it's a signal you need. We're all evolving, and it's our role to be mutants, and it's time to evolve again. And if you're not evolving, you're in trouble unless you're consciously resting and waiting for the next mutation and migration to take place. We're all migrants too, and sure, there are some people that stayed back in the water and they're still there. Most Europeans, you see, had the chance to come over to this new world, but they didn't migrate. They didn't want to take that chance. And so it's true that as we move into the future, some will migrate and mutate and some won't. We must be very gentle with each other and not get involved in genocidal chauvinisms here, because it is all one life web that we call these the first four circuits. These are the first four terrestrial survival techniques, and you have to master these before you can go on.
These are common circuitry. They're common experience, and obviously the state of consciousness on the planet today is aware of the fact that those four circuits are not adequate to the needs that an increasing amount of human beings are discovering. The turbulence in the 60s being that showing definite major social signs of the chafing. There are four more circuits, and how do they resolve the bind that we've obviously gotten ourselves into? I mean, this bind has led most of the Third Circuit masters of the world to predict imminent doom. What is the alternative?
There are four stages of evolution which are going to come within the lifetimes of most of the listeners of this program. But before I go into the next four stages of evolution, I'd like to remind our listeners that the four mutations that we've gone through, the 4 migrations that we've gone through as individuals, which took us from our mother's arms to the point of socio-sexual domestication, have recapitulated the 4 great movements in the evolution of species. We all started off as marine creatures. We were all amoebas once under the water, and then we've gone through the same cycle of mutation and migration. And I'm sure that all these cycles in history have produced the turmoil that we saw in the 60s. To finally come back to your question about the next 4 movements, I wanted the listeners to understand that this is not just individual, but that the species itself is moving. The next great mutation and migration in the life process on this planet is going to involve space migration. Now, I want to point out that space migration is not Buck Rogers, rockets, doesn't involve any of this galactic cowboys and Indians of Star Trek. Space migration is the most mundane thing, if you pardon the pun. We're simply going to build out there in lunar Earth orbit cylinders which are between 10 and 30 miles long, in which the landscape will be exactly like the landscape that's preferred down here. There will be as many as 20 or possibly even 30 cities like Houston or Lake Tahoe or Portofino in Italy or Stad's ski resorts. Matter of fact, for those of you who really want to get the feeling for space migration, as you walk around your hometown right now, imagine that you're in a space cylinder. But just imagine that over the horizon there's an Algerian sand dune, or just over the other hill there's a Swiss ski resort. Matter of fact, you could, I'm thinking of making a movie in which we demonstrate that you could transplant Earthlings and put them in one of these space cylinders, and it would take them a long time to figure out that they were really living in space, because essentially, of course, the Earth is a spaceship itself.
Do you really think that man can be so presumptuous as to come anywhere near the beauty, subtlety, and ecology of the landscape of the Earth as it is naturally evolved?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The Judeo-Christian philosophy tells us that man has fallen, original sin. And there's always this notion that we're incompetents and that we're somehow cluttering up. There's a new ecological morality that I believe in ecological consciousness, but I don't believe in ecological morality or ecological lawmaking. I absolutely refuse to be strapped into a seatbelt. I'll walk before I'll let buzzers tell me that I have to have. I'll take my chances, and I won't complain if I get hurt. But there's this notion that man is presumptuous. Now, I believe that the DNA code has pre-programmed everything. I think it's all perfect. I think that humanity is playing its part, just as every species plays its part. Every protein molecule plays its part in a design which has been worked out. And what's happening on this planet is happening on literally billions of planets like ours throughout our local galaxy alone. We think we're rather unique. Actually, we're just frogs in a little pond, and in our area of the galaxy alone, there are millions of little frog pond planets like ours in which we're evolving exactly as we are here. As a matter of fact, I suspect, this is belief and not fact. Most everything I'm saying in this program comes from scientists. I'm not making any of this up. I'm passing on the findings of Gerard O'Neill and of the NASA committees who study space migration. And when we get to life extension, I'm passing on the findings of geneticists and biologists. But now I'll give you a belief, or I'll give you a fun fantasy. I find it useful and entertaining and stimulating to my intelligence to believe, quote, believe, that we're cloned here, and that we will find ourselves seated on millions of other planets. So we get the question of who seeded us, or are we presumptuous to terraform a planet, or are we being presumptuous to take over nature's role in building new worlds? No, that's what we're supposed to do. Think of us as simple, humble gardeners. Or the human species now is like a Teamsters union. It's our job just to build the ships to get us up there, to get, not by us, I mean all forms of life. Because we got to take all forms of life with us. I think that's the Noah's Ark metaphor is one of the most pervasive throughout human philosophy. Almost every tribe and primitive island religious group has their Noah's Ark myth, that some catastrophe was going to happen, and so they got together and they took two of each species. I think that's where it's at, and I think that's our role. It's neither presumptuous, nor is it original sin, Judeo-Christian put-down of human species. We're simply programmed at the right time to play this robot role of getting all life off the planet.
Oh, I can see that and accept it or reject it. It doesn't really make any difference. But I mean, that's quite a substantially different thing. Saying that we're programmed, we're designed to move into space, to start traveling in space, to start understanding the immensity out there, which has mysteries in it, which dwarf the mysteries of our Mother Earth. But I can't go along with you when you say living in a tin can can come anywhere near living on the surface of good old Mother Earth.
That becomes a matter of aesthetics. You see, I see us now, I could give you a dozen metaphors. It's 1493. Now, we're sitting around in a coffee shop in Lisbon, Spain, and I say, hey, man, this guy Columbus come back, and the world is round, it's not flat, and there's all this land over there, and you say, well, I'd rather stay here and go. There are no cathedrals over there, and come on. They have a good wine over there. Okay, baby, you stay. Let us go. Well, then we'll come back and we'll bring you. Then there's options always open. You can change your mind. I think these conversations are necessary. I think these conversations we're having took place when we were underwater, deciding, well, we're going to climb out there and try it out. As long as I know you won't put us in jail or keep us from trying it. And I know you'll keep your eyes open and your ears open and see how we do. And I think you're ready to change your mind. It's not a tin can. As a matter of fact, think of most people on this planet live in tin cans, namely motor cars, right? And they live in these funny little hunky-dunk, condominium apartments. See, the facts of the matter are, in space, you can have up to 5 acres, perhaps even more, and you can design exactly as you want. The cylinders, far from being tin cans, there'll be no manufacturing or agriculture in the 30-mile residence. That'll all be outside. So the 30 miles will be an incredible park. Who but the greatest millionaires have 30 miles of landscape to wander around in, and no cars, and no see down here we climb into these tin cans with pneumatic rubber tires. Up there, sure, there'll be little cylinders outside for those who want a hot rod drag. The beauty about space migration is everything you do down here you can bring up there, except for destructive. If you want to have little cylinders where people want to shoot out and get drunk on Saturday night, and sure they can do it. We'll build little cylinders for Hell's Angels where they can fight with each other. We're not against really anything. We want to give everybody the space to do their own thing. So it's not tin cans. I think for most people, the quality of life and the relationship to nature will be much, and also there's the glory and the creativity of creating landscape. We're reserving the DNA code to bring the soil there and to work out an ecological system. Of course, this is Los Angeles thinking. Now, the thing about Los Angeles, which is amusing, those of you men there, 50 years ago, Los Angeles was a desert. And look at it now. Nowhere on the planet has the average person, an average middle-class person, put more effort into beautifying the environment. Now, it's all man-made. It's all human-made. But still, it's kind of, and Los Angeles is funny, too, because people lived out their visions there. You'll have Babylonian temples and Mexican haciendas and, Cape Cod cottages. And I think it's amusing. And I think it's that the West Coast, in a sense, is the last frontier, and it's there where people's final terrestrial visions could be expressed on this desert, which is now, they're in more palm trees now in Los Angeles than they're on the Sahara.
Well, I still say what you're mostly going to need out at L5 is ecologists and people who can deal with whole systems.
Absolutely.
On that question of presumption, as we were talking yesterday about this Judeo-Christian morality, which is overlaid onto ecological perceptions, I see it as a calcified structure that genetically was programmed. Your response was, what is needed is consciousness of that.
Yeah.
And you offhandedly dropped the whole Judeo-Christian culture, which may leave some of the listeners wondering where it went to. The
Judeo-Christian thing is based on the fall. Got it? The fall. It's based on gravity. You want to know what original sin is? It's gravity. You want to know what the original grace is? It's levity.
Is the possibility of this obviously disintegrating ethic? I mean, as the pornography trials go around, as the drug trials go around, obviously the ethic is disintegrating. That the Judeo-Christian ethic, basically what it did is it restricted people from doing things until such time as the species evolved to enough consciousness to look at what it was encountering.
Absolutely.
So that a consciousness, a fluid consciousness of encounter
the Judeo-Christian philosophy was a very necessary philosophy to somehow socialize and civilize domesticated apes, because it's a domesticated ape philosophy. Do not covet your neighbor's wife. Do not covet your neighbor's goods. I mean, come on. Is that the kind of philosophy that's going to lead us into glories of evolution? You know, it's a way to hold down the animals. And the very fact that it's existed for 2,000 years is testimony to the fact that it was necessary and that it worked. It allowed society to get together, to cooperate enough. That's a great thing of Christianity, that it taught us how to cooperate so that we could build the galleys and build the technology, which technology is simply extensions of our nervous system, to the point where we can evolve to the next stage. So the same thing is true, by the way, Buddhism. I often say, Buddhism was based on the discovery by the Buddha, who was a prince. Now, by prince, he means he was a middle-class young man that went to college because his family kept him from knowing the facts of life, just as most college students are kept away from the facts of life. Then he discovered, that great triple discovery of the Buddha, which led to a philosophy that's very powerful. He discovered death. He saw a dead man. He discovered illness. He never knew that existed. And he discovered aging. And he said, my God, if that's the bottom line of life, why should I bother to get my degree and become a prince and so forth? I'm going to drop out because life is meaningless, because the end point of life is disease, senility, impotence, and death. Now, that was a very powerful psychology for pre-scientific species of domesticated primates. But now, if the Buddha were alive today, he'd be majoring in biogenetics, and he would be reading Scientific American, and he would realize that death is no longer necessary, that disease is being rapidly eliminated, and that literally the only blocks to immortality are psychological. So Buddhism, as was true of the Judeo-Christian philosophy, was necessary at a time in our evolution, but we have to be aware that we're growing beyond that, and to repeat the old philosophies that just don't work today is a mistake. We revere them, we cherish them, but we've got to move on beyond them.
There's one technical difficulty that needs to be overcome, one basic one that I'm thinking in terms of, which is that obviously the entire species, individual members of the entire species are not evolving at the same rate, or not at the same state of evolution. Yet with the situation, at least in this country and most of the Western world, of electronic media, of mass distribution of information, we find a lot of people who are at evolutionary step, if you grade it from 1 to 10, evolutionary step 3, coming in contact with information from evolutionary step 7 and becoming quite agitated,
yes,
and reacting on that plane hostily or whatever way. Is there a way to smooth over this transmission difficulty? Although
yes,
you did say being gentle.
Well, of course, you're putting your finger on one of the great occupational hazards of a genetic agent. In the 60s, we introduced, see, I'm the salesman for DNA Code. When I say we, I'm speaking, of course, of the manufacturers, introduced the human body and the human brain as your own. We say, this is station, Timothy Leary Broadcasting Station, KPFK, and we offer you a 30 billion cell brain. We offer you a 5-circuit body for your pleasure, enjoyment, and for the enrichment of your life. Well, come on. The idea that consciousness was something that you could move and change, and the idea that your body was a time ship filled with all sorts of receptors that you weren't aware of and that could be tuned in and moved around for your pleasure and for your disciplined performance, this was an evolutionary idea. It did create a predictable reaction. And I think, though, that there has never been a cultural change in history that was as profound, as pervasive, and as bloodless as the Cultural Revolution of the 60s. The great thing about it was that it was done with humor, and it was done with compassion, and it was done with a lot of modesty. Of course, some of the hippies tended to be megalomaniac and messianic, but and that led to a few skulls being cracked. But by and large, it was a smiling revolution, and it was a levitational procedure. And by and large, I'm very proud of what happened in the 60s. Every aspect of our culture was reformed and revised and reviewed and improved. The same thing will happen as we move into the next evolutionary stages, which, as I say, are space migration and an increased use of technology for neurological purposes. It's the function of the mutants to be totally aware of the anxieties they create in those they are leaving. Think of us as the advanced scouts for the entire human race. We're volunteering for this role. If we come to grief, if taking drugs does rot your head and break your chromosomes, snap and crack, then let us take the risks. We do it voluntarily. Watch us very carefully. Check us out. But keep open to us, and we'll keep feeding back our results to you, because that's our function as evolutionary pioneers.
As you go into space, what I would be looking for is the difficulties in coexisting with an artificial environment. However, I tend to think that we are ready for some kind of evolutionary step. For one thing, our methods of handling information have gotten a great deal more sophisticated. We have computers and we have ways of even thinking, conceptualizing information that are new. And, we're actually finding ways where the man in the street is actually beginning to be able to think in the way that Einstein did, and it's taken years, but there are vast implications for just being able to think and conceptualize your reality in a different way.
The television is an Einsteinian device because it produces a relativity of realities. The average American kid or the Western European kid who has access to a television in 1 week, by dialing and tuning, can experience more realities and a relativism of realities than the most widely traveled person did 100 years ago. So that's, I've been through all the liberal radical stages. Now at the moment, I've come to a position where I think that General Motors and Ford and those monolithic auto companies, blindly, without realizing what they were doing, performed a tremendous evolutionary task. They took peasant, domesticated primates off the farms, and in one generation put them behind the wheel of these rapidly moving things where they're shifting and talking about cylinders, and they're learning how to externalize their nervous system. So, and it got people in the idea of motion. It got them, it changed, as we know, the sexual mores, because you could get out in the back seat of a car. And granted that it's looked at the mass level, it seems plastic and it seems roboty, but I want to tell you, life on those farms was pretty roboty too.
You were talking about 5 circuits, the 60s. You were talking about the 60s and 5 circuits. And then I have neurologic, and you talk about 7 circuits there. Now I understand you're up to 8.
Yeah.
You've covered 4. is there something different in nature about the four which follow? I'm wondering whether we are going into a phase of more conscious evolution, perhaps, or what is involved in the next four steps?
Well, the fifth, I've described the first four circuits of the nervous system, which every adult human terrestrial uses to get along. Then in the 60s, on a mass scale, a new circuit of the nervous system was activated, and we call this the fifth circuit, and it has to do with consciousness of the body and the brain as instruments you can use yourself. Now this was a rarity. In the past, only the nobility and the aristocracy and the big stars were able to say, my body is my own. It doesn't belong to the church or the state, and I can put whom and what I please in my own body and experience what I want with my own body. This was considered just totally impossible for the average person until the 60s. It did take a period of affluence and technological superfluity to allow the circuit to emerge. The fifth circuit of the nervous system is body consciousness, and certainly no one can quarrel with my statement that a tremendous new multi-billion-dollar industry is developed in this country, which you could call body consciousness. I'm talking about water beds and perfumes and scents and strange new textures, the whole notion of bubble baths, and I'm talking about diets and health foods. I'm talking about all the new yogas and the sense of, not to mention new sexuality and the varieties and the complexities of erotic behavior.
But it's the same thing that others would call decadence compared to the last days of the Roman Empire.
It is true that in the past, it was at the moment of high imperial success that there was enough affluence and security from the four terrestrial circuits that the nobility could start playing with new forms of consciousness, and the nobility could announce their independence from the first four survival circuits. Now, in the past, this was survivally dangerous because the Romans would be developing their body consciousness. Meanwhile, the Medes and the Persians and the Huns and the Goths were at the doorstep. And this, of course, was the terror that haunted J. Edgar Hoover and Richard Nixon and LBJ in the 60s. If our young people would rather do meditation and get high than fight in Vietnam, then we're in trouble, because they were thinking, with rear-view mirror thinking, that every great empire in the past, the Egyptian, the Persian, the Babylonian, the Greek, the Roman, and of course even the British Empire became very decadent as it passed the high point of its expansion. And that's rear-view mirror thinking. The thing that changes it all is that now, for the first time, we have something for the turned-on consciousness to do, and some place for them to go, and that's out. The problem in the 60s was you could get high, and you could have visions, you could reproduce the Buddha Hindu trips, you could see it all, and then you came down the next morning, and what was going on? The Vietnam War, racism, cultural catastrophes, and police repression, and there was this tremendous, literally no place to go. The great mutational step that's taken us from giving the Fifth Circuit someplace to go was the Apollo lunar soil samples. Showed us that the moon was literally more than a gold mine. The moon has exactly the elements and minerals that are needed to build new worlds in space. Now, space migration is nothing, it's like building condominiums. It's no big deal at all. The space migration, to me and to O'Neill and to those people who were philosophically interested in it, simply provides an externalization of the visions of the 60s. But now, for the first time, we have some place to go where we can live out our new cultural visions. We can experiment with lifestyles. You can't do that on the surface of a shrinking planet with the population increasing. So space migration is tied to consciousness movement of the 60s, which we call the Fifth Circuit activation. Is that clear?
Pretty clear. I'm really glad you mentioned that about the moon, because it's the fact that the moon is full of treasures is not very often brought out for some reason. Nobody stops to think that everything that you need to build a huge colony in space is available on the moon, and that it really doesn't take very much it doesn't take very much fuel to lift off from the moon and move it back up to L5.
Yeah, it's literally, they say, it's about 100 times cheaper to build a beautiful garden condominium, a 5-acre per person place up there using lunar soil than it does to build a condominium for 10,000 people down here. Because you don't have gravity, that's the big issue, as you pointed out.
I don't know if there is any information stoppage from the various agencies that have been on the moon, but I'm reminded as you said that of the fact that back at the end of the last century when John D. Rockefeller I was sent down to Pennsylvania by his boss to find out if this black goop that was coming out of the ground was worth anything. He looked it over, came back and said it's worthless. There's no commercial potential.
Right.
And then proceeded, now I don't know that there's, or even suspect an information stoppage conspiracy, but there is that possibility. Maybe just because people don't.
Well, the L5 Society has made some real strides in making it known that good things are going on up there.
I agree with you in your analysis of the Rockefeller phenomena. The public doesn't realize that the moon is more than a gold mine for space migration. It's the most valuable piece of territory that's ever existed. However, I make this flat prediction that in the research and development laboratories of every large aerospace and energy company in the world, they're studying the implications of the moon as soil samples, and they're thinking about it. Now, naturally, they're not talking about it. It's not. I don't believe in paranoid conspiracy theories. But still, there's no question that the real meaning and value of the lunar samples has not been broadcast to the American people. At this point, I think we should mention, with your permission, the L5 Society, which is a group of scientists and interested non-scientists who are publicizing and backing space migration. The L5 Society has a newsletter, and you can get in touch with them by writing L5, 1620 North Park Avenue. That's 1620 North Park Avenue, Tucson, Arizona. And they'll send you the L5 newsletter, which I find to be the most mind-blowing, life-changing publication that I've ever read.
Okay, let's keep moving up the ladder of these here circuits. Because we're only up to number 5 so far.
You want to take us high, or?
Yeah. We talked a little bit about number 5 being concerned with the body, the perception of the body time, and we talked about how you feel that the energy that we can do something on Circuit 5 now, which was never before the case, and this distinguishes our society from the ancient Romans in their decadence. Where do we go outside of going to space? What comes after that?
The interesting thing is this. In no culture in history did you have what we now have, a consciousness movement. It's a multi-billion-dollar, TM and EST and the notion of personal growth, of consciousness raising. Every Girl Scout troop, meets once a week in the local grammar school for consciousness-raising sessions. The notion that you can grow and evolve in your own life, it's an old Oriental idea, which has now become very Americanized and is the key to the Fifth Circuit experience. But then what do you do? After you've centered your consciousness and got your stuff together and you're suntanned and you're polyphase orgasmed and you're self-actualized, and where do you go? Well, of course, my answer is we go to space, but then to go on to the Sixth Circuit of the nervous system, once we live in space, see, remember, we're living at the bottom of a 4,000-mile gravity swamp. We're literally crawling around like slugs in the bottom of this 4,000-mile atmosphere sea.
Energy trap.
It's an energy trap. Yeah, it takes only 1/1000th of the solar energy gets down to us through the Van Allen belt and the atmosphere. Not only that, it's hard to communicate. Down here, we have to use crude methods. We communicate by rubbing our vocal cords together, which creates sound waves, which are carried through this medium, this ocean that we live in. And I rub my my vocal cords together and it hits your eardrums. That's very mechanical. Such things as telepathy, neuroelectric communication, computer-brain link-up, and so forth cannot exist down here because we're at the bottom of the swamp. It's as though we were swimming underwater. We can't talk, because we'll blah, blah, blah. We try to use telepathy down here, but we can't because there's too much interference with gravity, electromagnetic racket, and the atmosphere itself. As soon as we live up in space, then the electricity, which we know exists in the brain, most likely can be used for a higher form of communication, which will not be muscular. I want to point out that everything we're doing down here is muscular. Even our language, our thought is muscular in the sense that it's artifacts that come from vocalisms. Up there, we will learn how to think and to communicate electro-neurologically. This is going to be one of the aspects that will develop, and the sixth circuit of our nervous system will be activated then. The interesting thing about mutation is this, and metamorphosis. And I'm going to tell you now one of the most impressive findings of science, which, of course, every school boy and girl knows. Within the DNA code of every caterpillar, and the DNA code is in every cell in the body of the caterpillar, is the blueprint for constructing the body and the nervous system of a butterfly. Now, in the DNA code of an infant, in each one of us, when we were babies in our mother's arms, in our DNA code was the blueprint for a sexually mature adult. And you didn't know how large your breasts were going to be, or you didn't know, exactly what your sexual physique would be, but your DNA code knew, although the little baby had no awareness of this. So that when we leave the surface of the planet, just as when we left our mother's arms or when we left the sea to crawl on the shoreline, the new circuits of our nervous system are going to be activated.
You're listening to the Psychedelic Salon, where people are changing their lives one thought at a time.
Although I've said it before, each time this idea of space migration comes up, well, I feel compelled to let you know that I'm personally not a subscriber to that possibility. And since I've said this before, I'll just leave it at that for now. In fact, since we still have one more tape in this series to go, I'm going to reserve my comments about this long interview of Dr. Leary on KPFK radio in Houston, Texas in 1976, November of 76, that is. I'm going to reserve my comments for the next podcast when I'll see if I can come up with some kind of a coherent comment about all three podcasts that take up this interview. But right now, I want to once again say a little bit more about the Occupy Together demonstrations that are taking place in hundreds of cities around the U.S. right now. To begin, I want to play a short clip I recorded while watching some of the proceedings from the Speaker's Corner at the Occupy Wall Street protest. As you no doubt know, the demonstrators have not been allowed to use electronic amplification of what the speakers are saying. And so their method is for a speaker to say a few words that are then repeated by the crowd up front so as to carry the message all the way to the back. And the talks, for the most part, have been well worth listening to, even though you have to hear everything twice. So I'm only going to play one short clip right now, just to give you an idea of how it works. The speaker this time is Bill McGibbon, who is a well-known environmentalist, author, and journalist who has been at the forefront of many discussions about global climate change, as well as being a participant in the sit-ins and demonstrations all around the world on that issue.
We've had 15,000 rallies.
We have 15,000 rallies
in every country.
In every country.
Except North Korea.
Except North Korea.
Everywhere around the world.
Everywhere around the world.
Poor people and black people and brown people and Asian people and young people.
Poor people, black people, brown people, Asian people, and old people.
People are standing up.
Are standing up.
Most of those places. Don't produce that much carbon.
Don't produce that much carbon.
They need us.
They need us.
to act with them and for them.
To act with them and for them.
Because the problem is 20 blocks
is 20 blocks
south of here.
South of here.
That's where the empire lives.
That's where the empire lives.
And we've got to figure out how to tame it. And make it work for this planet.
And make it work for this planet.
Or not work at all. Thank you guys very much.
So that's what it sounds like at the Occupy Wall Street site these days. But please don't think that everyone there has climate change as their number one issue. In fact, the lack of a single well-focused issue is what is driving the establishment media nuts, I think. And it's also the thing that they'll probably never be able to get their heads around. Actually, I did hear one demonstrator answer a reporter with a perfect reply when he asked, "Well, just what is it that you want?" And the woman replied, "We want the same things you want." And for me, that perfectly sums it up. Unless, of course, you're in the 1% and not the 99% with the rest of us. I think that 1960s activist and author Todd Gitlin said it best when he said, "We are the 99% is a clear message. It is unfair and in fact disgusting that the American political economy is run for the benefit of a plutocracy. I don't see how that can be misunderstood." Another writer, Robert Borosich, said, "Occupy Wall Street has no policy agenda, but it has utter moral clarity. The demonstrators have built an island of democracy in the belly of Wall Street. The bankers looking down on them would be on the street had not the taxpayers bailed them out, and now they are confronted with students sinking under student debt with no jobs, homeowners who are underwater and can't find mortgage relief, workers desperate for relief. No one is confused about the message. Wall Street got bailed out, Main Street was abandoned. The top 1% rigs the rules and pockets the rewards, and the 99% get sent the bill for the party they weren't even invited to. Occupy Wall Street is already a political steamroller, without an agenda, without an electoral operation, without a slate of candidates. If it continues to grow, it will force every national politician to decide whose side he or she is on. Are you with the banks or with the 99%? And prove it. Reporters will ensure the questions get posed. Voters will be interested in the answers." Now I want to add my own personal hot button, at least the hot button of the moment for me. And while I very seldom mention politics in these podcasts, at a time like this, I feel compelled to add my 2 cents to the mix as well. Actually, I've got more than one issue that I'd like to raise, but I'm going to focus on one just for now, and that involves how you intend to vote in next year's presidential election if you live in the United States. During the campaign season of 2008, I actually went out on a limb in one of the podcasts and said that I was going to support Obama, and mainly because I thought it would be a complete disaster to have that Clinton woman sitting in the White House. Now I'm not so sure that she would have done worse than the current occupant. In fact, it was only a month or so after I made that comment in a podcast that Obama betrayed me. Unfortunately, it wouldn't be the last time. But one of the issues I was following at the time was that of domestic spying without search warrants. At first, Obama said he would filibuster the new draconian law regarding spying on us in our homes. But once he secured the nomination, he reversed himself and vigorously supported spying on U.S. citizens without a warrant. I knew then that he was willing to lie to us about anything in order to get what he wanted. But hey, that's the way the 1% works, so I guess I shouldn't have been surprised. But since being elected, he's gone back on his word about a whole range of issues and promises that he made to us in order to get our votes. He hasn't closed the prison at Guantanamo as he promised. He not only didn't end state-sponsored torture and rendition, he's institutionalized and expanded it. The unnecessary war in Iraq still drags on, and the war in Afghanistan is significantly larger than it was when he took charge. Then we come to the issue of medical marijuana. And here's what Obama had to say when he was still trying to get the votes from our community.
Now, when it comes to medical marijuana, I have more of a practical view than anything else. I mean, my attitude is that if it's an issue of doctors prescribing medical marijuana as a treatment for glaucoma or as a cancer treatment, I think that should be appropriate, because there really is no difference between that and a doctor prescribing morphine or anything else. I mean, I would not punish doctors if it's prescribed in a way that is appropriate. That may require some changes in federal law. I will tell you that, I mean, I want to be honest with you, whether I want to use a whole lot of political capital on that issue when we're trying to get health care passed or end the war in Iraq is, the likelihood of that being real high on my list is not likely.
But it's safe to say you wouldn't be.
What I'm not going to be doing is using Justice Department resources to try to circumvent state laws on this issue, simply because I want folks to be investigating violent crimes and potential terrorism. We've got a lot of things for our law enforcement officers to deal with.
Now, while that seems quite clear, it clearly was a huge lie, because not only have the federal raids on medical marijuana facilities and persecution of patients continued under Obama, he has significantly stepped up the pogrom against us, as witnessed by the letter that his so-called Justice Department sent to landlords in California just a few days ago. What Obama has done now is that he's given the landlords in California who are renting to medical marijuana dispensaries just 45 days to close them up and evict them, or else Obama will confiscate their shopping centers and other property where the dispensaries are located. In other words, Obama intends to completely close down all medical marijuana distribution in California next month. I'm trying not to get angry right now, because I still remember Timothy Leary last week saying that we shouldn't get angry at these screwheads even though we have a good cause to. But what I am leading up to is a plea for you to not only not vote for this man in 2012, but for you to also encourage all of your friends, relatives, neighbors, and coworkers to not vote for him either. And while the reasons I've just mentioned are sufficient for that cause, there is one more huge reason, a reason that overrides everything else. As you probably heard, Obama ordered the murder of a U.S. citizen who had never appeared in court to defend himself. Call it an assassination, a hit, or what it really was, a murder. The order was recently carried out, and now a U.S.-born citizen has been murdered by a gutless and cowardly drone attack in Yemen. The man's crimes are primarily what he had to say in his sermons and what he said on his website. In other words, Obama murdered an American-born citizen for exercising his free speech rights. Granted, the Secret Star Commission that meets in the bowels of the White House, who we know very little about, said that he did other dastardly deeds, but they don't say what their evidence is, and in fact they didn't even have to produce any evidence in public before putting a piece of paper in front of Obama requesting approval for murder. You know, I'm an attorney who has sworn to uphold the laws and Constitution of the United States, and I find the actions of Obama and these people odious in the extreme and most definitely anti-American. Think about this for a minute. The President of the United States has ordered the execution of one of our citizens without the benefit of any type of judicial review whatsoever. The only review he had was of his own lawyers in the executive branch. And I'm talking about the 50-page memo, two obviously unqualified lawyers by the names of David Barron and Martin Lederman wrote in order to justify such an unconstitutional action. And by the way, Barron is a professor at Harvard Law School when he's not working for the government, and Lederman does the same as a professor at Georgetown Law School when he's not a government employee. So if you're thinking about going to law school, you maybe should cross off those institutions from your list, because they're quite obviously institutions for the criminally insane if they employ guys like this. Well, I've got to stop here on this Obama thing because, well, you're probably going to think that I'm a Tea Party supporter or some kind of a weirdo like that. Well, I'm not, in case you're wondering. I'm just an old-school Vietnam vet who simply doesn't believe in killing people without first giving them a chance to defend themselves. So my pitch to you is to not vote for Obama in 2012. And don't give me this sad song about him being the lesser of two evils. Since he's the first U.S. president to order the murder of someone he felt threatened by, I'd say he is no longer the lesser of the evils in Washington. Don't let the establishment bully you into voting not for someone but against the other guy just because you're fearful of what the other guy would do. How does it get worse than having the president order murder by drone? Do they have to do it inside the U.S. before you get the message? Personally, I'm going to write in none of the above, and that's who I'm voting for president for. And I hope that millions more of us do the same thing in order to let these screwhead politicians know that they don't have anything close to a mandate. And that's what I see the Occupy Together movement being all about. The fact that the majority of people in this land think they're getting a raw deal by the oligarchy, better known as the 1%. Take a breath, Lorenzo. Now, in order to calm myself down a bit before I close, I'd like to read for you the last part of what Naomi Klein had to say at the Occupy Wall Street camp the other day. And my guess is that what she has to say is very close to what you and I are thinking right now ourselves. And here's what Ms. Klein had to say. We all know, or at least sense, that the world is upside down. We act as if there is no end to what is actually finite, fossil fuels and the atmospheric space to absorb their emissions, and we act as if there are strict and immovable limits to what is actually bountiful, the financial resources to build the kind of society we need. The task of our time is to turn this around, to challenge this false scarcity, to insist that we can afford to build a decent, inclusive society, while at the same time respect the real limits to what the earth can take. What climate change means is that we have to do this on a deadline. This time, our movement cannot get distracted, divided, burned out, or swept away by events. This time we have to succeed. And I'm not talking about regulating banks and increasing taxes on the rich, though that's important. I am talking about changing the underlying values that govern our society. This is hard to fit into a single media-friendly demand, and it's also hard to figure out how to do it. It is no less urgent for being difficult. That is what I see happening in this square. In the way you are feeding each other, keeping each other warm, sharing information freely, and providing health care, meditation classes, and empowerment training. My favorite sign here says, I care about you. In a culture that trains people to avoid each other's gaze, to say, let them die, that is a deeply radical statement. A few final thoughts. In this great struggle, here are some things that don't matter. What we wear, whether we shake our fists or make peace signs, whether we can fit our dreams for a better world into a media soundbite. And here are a few things that do matter. Our courage, our moral compass, how we treat each other. We have picked a fight with the most powerful economic and political forces on the planet. That's frightening. And as this movement grows from strength to strength, it will get more frightening. Always be aware that there will be temptation to shift to smaller targets, like, say, the person sitting next to you at this meeting. After all, that is a battle that's easier to win. Don't give in to the temptation. I'm not saying don't call each other on shit, but this time, let's treat each other as if we plan to work side by side in struggle for many, many years to come, because the task before us will demand nothing less. Let's treat this beautiful movement as if it is the most important thing in the world, because it is. It really is. And for now, this is Lorenzo signing off from Cyberdelic Space. Be well, my friends.
I don't have to tell you things are bad. Everybody knows things are bad. It's a depression. Everybody's out of work or scared of losing their job. The dollar buys a nickel's worth. Banks are going bust. Shopkeepers keep a gun under the counter. Punks are running wild in the street, and there's nobody anywhere who seems to know what to do, and there's no end to it. We know the air is unfit to breathe, and our food is unfit to eat. We sit watching our TVs while some local newscaster tells us that today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be. We know things are bad, worse than bad. They're crazy. It's like everything everywhere is going crazy, so we don't go out anymore. We sit in the house, and slowly the world we're living in is getting smaller, and all we say is, please, at least leave us alone in our living rooms. Let me have my toaster and my TV and my steel-belted radios, and I won't say anything. Just leave us alone. Well, I'm not going to leave you alone. I want you to get mad. I don't want you to protest. I don't want you to riot. I don't want you to write to your congressman because I wouldn't know what to tell you to write. I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation and the Russians and the crime in the street. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being. God damn it. My life has value. So, I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore! I want you to get up right now. Get up, go to your windows, open them, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore. Things have got to change.
How many stations does this go out?
You've got to get mad.
67. I know it goes to Louisville and Atlanta.
I'm not going to take this anymore. Then we'll figure out what to do about the depression and the inflation and the oil crisis. But first, get up out of your chairs, open the window, stick your head out and yell, and say, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore. But first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore. Stick your head out of the window, open it, and stick your head out and keep yelling and yell, I'm as mad as hell, I'm not going to take this anymore. Just get up from your chairs right now. Go to the window.
Where are you going? I want to see if anybody's yelling.
Window, open it and stick your head out and yell and keep yelling. I'm mad as hell. I'm not going to take this anymore.
I'm not gonna take it anymore! I'm mad as hell! I'm not gonna take it anymore!
I'm mad as hell! I'm not gonna take it anymore!
I'm mad as hell and I'm not gonna take it anymore!
I'm not gonna take it anymore!
I'm mad as hell! I'm mad as hell! I'm mad as hell! I'm not gonna take this anymore!
Now it's your turn.